What happens when a man of flame falls into a universe built on eternal darkness? Think about it: a being who burns brighter than the sun, suddenly trapped in a galaxy where hope is not just rare, it's heresy. A place where light itself is a weapon, and even the stars are dying embers in a war that never ends. What if the Human Torch Johnny Storm, the fiery heart of the Fantastic Four, was hurled into the grim, merciless world of Warhammer 40K? Before we dive into this inferno of imagination, stay till the very end, because by the time we reach the final moments, you'll discover what truly happens when the light of one man collides with the fire of gods and demons alike. Now, let's begin. It started not with a bang, but with a scream, the kind that splits through dimensions. Johnny Storm was mid-flight above Manhattan, fire trailing behind him like a comet of defiance. The air shimmered with heat as he streaked across the skyline, testing the limits of his flame. But then, the sky tore open. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't a portal of Reed's design. It was something alive. A rift in the fabric of reality, pulsing with colors that no human mind could name. His sensors flared cosmic radiation, off the charts. Johnny barely had time to say his catchphrase before gravity itself inverted. Flame on. The words froze on his lips as the world folded inward. There was no up or down, no time or breath, only burning silence. And when the light returned, Johnny was falling through ash, through blood, through the screams of a billion lost souls. He crashed into a battlefield that had no end. The ground beneath him was not earth but iron and bone, slick with oil and the stench of decay. Jagged ruins rose like the teeth of titans long dead. Above, thunderhawks roared through black clouds, trading plasma fire that split the heavens. Everywhere, men and machines fought not for survival, but for obedience. He had landed on a world of the Imperium of man. The first to find him were the soldiers of the Astra Militarum, weary men in flak armor, eyes hollow from years of endless war. They saw the flames and opened fire. Bolts cracked through the haze, each one a miniature son of destruction. Johnny reacted instinctively, his body igniting in a flash of living plasma. Bullets melted in the air. The ground beneath him turned to glass. "Okay," he muttered, flames rising higher around his arms. "This ain't New York anymore." And then the whispers began. Through the smoke, a priest approached, his robe stitched with the sigils of the ecclesiarchy, his voice trembling with both awe and terror. "The Emperor's light, it manifests. Brothers, behold! A seraph of flame." The soldiers fell to their knees, some praying, others weeping. Johnny blinked, utterly lost. He wanted to laugh, but something in their eyes stopped him. Fear. Reverence. A kind of desperation he had never seen before. He wasn't a superhero here. He was a miracle. But miracles, in the 41st millennium, are not free. Within hours, word of the flame seraph spread. The Inquisition moved quickly, black ships slicing through the void, their heralds whispering of a new celestial anomaly. Was it a sign of the Emperor's will, or a daemon in disguise? Johnny didn't know it yet, but the universe he had entered was already making its judgment. He wasn't meant to be here. And the galaxy, the entire grim, suffocating machinery of Warhammer 40K, was about to decide whether to worship him, or burn him. The flames of one man had entered the darkness of 41,000 years of war. But in a world where gods are silent and humanity drowns in its own zeal, could one spark ignite a new dawn, or would it be swallowed whole by the endless night? That's the question that will define everything that follows. They came for him at dawn, though dawn in the 41st millennium is little more than a paler shade of darkness. The sound reached first, the deep, mechanical thunder of engines that drank the blood of the dying world below. Black ships tore through the choking skies, their hulls covered in purity seals, skulls, and the words in nomine imperator. When they landed, the ground itself trembled, and so did every man watching. Johnny Storm stood at the edge of a ruined bastion, the heat of his body keeping the ash storm at bay. He had been here only days, but already he understood the rhythm of this world. Death was routine, hope was heresy, and faith was the only fuel left. He had tried to talk to them, to explain, to tell them who he was, but words meant nothing here. His name, his world, his science, all of it sounded like madness to them. And madness, in the Imperium of man, meant one thing: corruption. When the Inquisitor stepped out of the shadows, the soldiers fell to their knees. She was tall, encased in black carapace armor, her eyes glowing faintly beneath a half-mask of gold. The aquila on her chest gleamed like a blade. "In the name of the God Emperor," she said, her voice cold as a frozen tomb, "you will come with us." Johnny raised his hand slowly, flames dimming until only smoke rose from his fingers. "Look, lady, I don't want trouble. I just need to find out where the hell I am." The soldiers aimed their lasguns instantly. "You speak blasphemy before the Emperor's chosen," she snapped. "You are not of this world, not of this galaxy. Yet you wield fire unblessed by the Mechanics, power ungranted by the Emperor's mercy. You are a threat." "I'm not your enemy," he said, stepping forward. The heat of his body warped the air. "Back home, I help people. Back home." Her tone dripped with contempt. There is no home beyond his light. Only the void. Johnny exhaled slowly. "Lady, you and I are not gonna get along." The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. "Then we shall see if your flame burns purer than sin." They brought him aboard the inquisitorial vessel Perseverance of Faith. The ship was a cathedral of iron and suffering arches of skulls, corridors lit by flickering candles, incense burning to mask the smell of sanctified oil. Every step echoed like judgment. In his cell, he sat in silence. The walls were cold, lined with null rods that bled energy from the air itself. He could feel his power weakening, as though the fire inside him was suffocating. Hours became days, or maybe longer. Time meant little aboard a ship where even sleep was rationed. The priests came to observe him, chanting litanies of purity. The Mechanics adepts whispered prayers to the Omnissiah, scanning his body with fear and fascination. They could not understand him, a man who burned without sorcery, without machine. And deep down, Johnny began to feel it, the dread. Not of death, but of being forgotten. A lone ember drifting in a sea of cold iron. But the universe had not finished with him yet. One night, if such a word had meaning in the endless void, the alarms screamed. The ship trembled. A voice rang through the voxcasters. "Warp breach detected. Demonic incursion in progress." The candles extinguished in an instant. Darkness swallowed the corridors. Johnny felt the air twist, the temperature drop below freezing. From the metal walls came whispers, voices that weren't human, echoing inside his skull. The Inquisitor stormed into his cell, power sword drawn. "You," she barked. "What have you brought upon us?" Johnny rose, the fire within him awakening. "Wasn't me, but whoever it is, they picked the wrong ship to haunt. Blasphemer! Stay!" The words were cut short as the wall beside her melted. Not from fire but from void. A shape stepped through, humanoid yet wrong, its form shifting like oil and smoke. Eyes burned across its body, each one weeping blood. A Daemon. The Inquisitor screamed a prayer and swung her sword. The blade met the creature, but its flesh healed as quickly as it was cut. Her faith faltered. The Daemon laughed, a sound like shattering glass and collapsing stars. And then, for the first time since his arrival, Johnny stopped holding back. Flame on. The cell exploded with light. The fire roared outward, consuming the corridor in a wave of golden white flame. The null rods melted, the sigils burned away. The Daemon shrieked as its shadow form turned to ash. The walls cracked, the deck buckled, but the fire didn't stop. Every cursed sigil that had slithered through the ship's hull was burned away in an instant. When it was over, only molten metal and silence remained. The Inquisitor stared at him, eyes wide behind her mask. "You," she whispered, trembling. "You burn with purity. No Daemon could wield such flame." He met her gaze, exhaustion painting his face. "Told you. I'm not your enemy." For the first time, she didn't argue. She bowed her head. "Perhaps, the Emperor sent you after all. But the warp has a way of listening and laughing." In the distance, beyond the material plane, something watched. The act of defiance, the burst of untainted fire, it was like a beacon to the entities that fed on chaos. The fire of one man had drawn their gaze. Johnny had survived the Inquisition. He had earned their wary respect. But in doing so, he had awakened something ancient, something that had slept since before mankind had taken to the stars. The warp itself hungered for his flame. And as the perseverance of faith sailed onward toward Holy Terra, a shadow began to follow in its wake, vast, unseen, and patient. The game had only just begun. Have you ever wondered what happens when power meets faith, when a man who believes in science walks among those who worship their machines? Because in the universe of Warhammer 40K, faith isn't just belief, it's fuel. It powers weapons, drives armies, and keeps an entire species from collapsing under its own despair. And now, standing amid the shadows of the Imperium, Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, was about to face that power head-on. Weeks passed aboard the Perseverance of Faith. Johnny was no longer a prisoner, but neither was he free. The Inquisitor, whose name he had finally learned, Inquisitor Seraphin Val, kept him close. She watched, studied, and questioned, her loyalty torn between awe and suspicion. When they finally reached orbit above Baal Primus, a world scarred by millennia of war, Seraphin gave her order: prepare the subject for audience with the Astartes, the Space Marines. Even Johnny, who had fought gods and cosmic forces, could feel something shift in the air when they arrived. They were Titans in armor, each step shaking the deck, their visors glowing with silent judgment. The Black Templars, zealous warriors who saw heresy in every shadow. The Inquisitor approached their leader, Marshal Alaric, his armor etched with prayers and purity seals. "My lord," Seraphin began. "This being claims no allegiance to chaos. His fire cleansed our ship during a warp incursion. I believe." The Marshal cut her off. His voice was a metallic growl, layered with centuries of contempt. "You believe? Faith is not belief, Inquisitor. Faith is proof through devotion." His visor turned toward Johnny. "And you, creature of fire? What god do you serve?" Johnny stood silent for a moment. His eyes glowed faintly, not from arrogance, but from defiance. "Where I come from, we don't serve gods. We protect people." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush steel. Blasphemy. The Templars' hands moved toward their weapons, but the Inquisitor raised hers in restraint. "He saved us, Marshal. His fire banished Daemons. Perhaps the Emperor's will flows through him." Alaric's tone darkened. "Then let his light be tested." the ritual of judgment began. They took him to the chapel of the martyrs, deep within the fortress monastery. Candles burned on every wall. Skulls of saints lined the altar. A massive statue of the emperor, carved in gold and bloodstone, loomed above them all. Johnny stood at the center, surrounded by hundreds of Templars chanting the litany of purity. Seraphim whispered, "Do not speak. Whatever happens, let your flame answer for you." At the marshal's command, the chamber dimmed. He stepped forward, holding the blade of sanctity, a weapon said to burn only the unholy. "If you are false," Alaric said, raising the sword, "this flame will devour you. If you are true, the emperor will grant you his mercy." The blade descended. It struck Johnny's shoulder and the world turned to fire. But it wasn't pain. It was power. The flames around Johnny erupted, not in wrath, but in radiance. The sword didn't consume him, it absorbed his fire, glowing brighter than any relic had in centuries. The Templars fell to their knees, blinded by the brilliance. When the light faded, the blade was molten gold, and Johnny stood untouched. Marshal Alaric removed his helmet. His face was scarred, his expression unreadable. "Inquisitor," he said slowly, "the Emperor has spoken." He turned toward Johnny and bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but in respect. "You burn with the Emperor's purity. You are no heretic." Word spread quickly. Across Baal Primus, soldiers whispered of the living flame. Some called him a saint reborn. Others feared him, calling him the harbinger of the end times. And in the shadows of the ecclesiarchy, prophets began to dream dreams of a man who walked like a comet and whose fire could purge even the darkest soul. But faith has two faces, one of reverence, and one of fear. As the Black Templars accepted Johnny into their ranks as an honored weapon, others began to plot. The Adeptus Mechanicus, curious and threatened, wanted to dissect his flame to harness it as a new form of energy. The ecclesiarchy debated whether to anoint or annihilate him. And deep within the warp, something vast and patient continued to watch. One night, Johnny stood outside the fortress, staring at the dying horizon. The air was thick with ash and incense. Inquisitor Seraphim approached. "You're quiet, for a man who set half the galaxy on fire." He smiled faintly. "Back home, I was the loud one. Here, it's hard to make noise when everything's already burning." She looked at him, a flicker of empathy in eyes that had seen too much. "The Emperor's light burns brightest in the darkest places. Perhaps that's why you were sent here." "Sent," he echoed. "You think this was planned?" "In the Imperium," she said softly, "there is no such thing as coincidence." He turned away, flames flickering along his arms. "Maybe. But I don't think your Emperor brought me here to worship him." She frowned. "Then why are you here, Johnny Storm?" He looked up at the stars, dim, distant, and dying. "Maybe I'm here to remind you what light really means." Far above them, the warp twisted again. A storm was coming, not of fire, but of chaos. And this time, it would not test his purity, it would test his soul. The galaxy was beginning to notice the anomaly, a man who burned like a god but prayed like a human. The Emperor's children would soon rally around him or turn their guns upon him. And in the deep, whispering dark beyond the veil of reality, a voice that had not been heard for 10,000 years began to stir. "Flame," it whispered. "Come to me." The warp had chosen its champion. And so had the light. What happens when your greatest gift begins to whisper back to you? When the fire that once obeyed your will starts to speak, not in words, but in hunger. In the dark cosmos of Warhammer 40K, power never comes without a price. And for Johnny Storm, the man who had burned through universes, the reckoning had just begun. It started as a flicker in his sleep. A pulse, faint at first like a heartbeat echoing through molten gold. Johnny would close his eyes and see flashes, not memories, but visions. Cities of glass, oceans of blood, towers made of screaming souls. He'd wake drenched in sweat, his skin cold, the fire inside him dimmed, as if something had fed on it while he dreamed. The Inquisitor noticed. So did the Black Templars. "Your flame is changing," said Marshal Alaric, watching him across the training grounds of Baal Primus. "The Emperor's light does not waver, yet yours flickers." Johnny clenched his fists, forcing the flame to steady. "Maybe I'm just tired." "No," Alaric said, his tone heavy with warning. "Something is watching you." He wasn't wrong. That night, while meditating before the golden statue of the Emperor, Johnny heard it clearly, for the first time. A voice, low and smooth, crawling through his mind like smoke. "You do not belong here, Fireborn. You are too bright for their iron cages." He froze, the flames around him sputtering. "They kneel to corpses. They pray to ghosts. But you are alive. You are fire itself. Join us, and we will show you what your light truly is." "Who are you?" Johnny whispered aloud. "Names mean nothing in the warp," it hissed, laughter echoing between dimensions. "But you have heard of me. The changer of ways. The one who births knowledge from chaos. Tziench." The moment the name passed through his thoughts, the fire turned blue. He screamed as his own power surged out of control, spiraling upward into a storm that split the heavens. Lightning forked across the sky. The fortress shook. 1,000 candles extinguished at once. Within seconds, space marines and priests flooded the hall, weapons raised. "In the Emperor's name," shouted Seraphin. "Contain the heretic." Johnny fell to his knees, clutching his head. "It's not me. Something's inside." Blue fire erupted from his body, dancing like serpents, warping reality around him. The chapel walls stretched and twisted, voices chanted from nowhere. The symbols of faith burned away, replaced by shifting runes that defied understanding. The Templars opened fire. Bolts tore through the haze, exploding in bursts of divine fury. But the flame absorbed it all. Johnny rose, surrounded by a storm of living fire, half golden, half blue. His eyes blazed like suns. "Get out," he roared. "Now." The Inquisitor hesitated only a moment, then dragged the others back as the chapel detonated in a column of light visible from orbit. When the flames cleared, Johnny was gone. He awoke in silence. The landscape was wrong, not physical, not real. The sky churned with impossible colors, the ground pulsed like flesh. In the distance, monoliths floated upside down, and rivers flowed into the air. He was inside the warp. And before him stood a figure cloaked in feathers and fire, its form shifting with every heartbeat. "Welcome, child of flame," it said, voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "Do you know what you are?" Johnny struggled to stand. "I'm human." "No. You are possibility. You are the spark that refuses to die. The Emperor's slaves cannot understand that, but I do." The entity's eyes multiplied, forming constellations of deceit and promise. "You could burn their Imperium to ashes. Free humanity from their rotting god. You could reshape this universe in your image." Johnny took a step back. "You talk like you know me. I know your soul. You are drawn to light, but you crave challenge. You have always played with boundaries, have you not? The Daemon extended a clawed hand. Join me, and you will not just burn, you will create. For a moment, the fire inside Johnny trembled. The offer was tempting, seductive even. Power beyond imagination, no more chains of faith or duty. Just raw, infinite freedom. But then he remembered the eyes of the people on Baal Primus, soldiers who had prayed to him, not out of greed, but out of desperation. The way Seraphim had looked at him, not with worship, but with hope. He clenched his fists, the blue flame turning white. Freedom means nothing if it costs your soul. He thrust his hand forward, releasing every ounce of his power in one blinding surge. The warp screamed. Reality cracked. The entity howled as the fire consumed its shifting form. Fool, it shrieked, dissolving into shadow. You cannot burn chaos. You are chaos. And then silence. Johnny collapsed onto solid ground. The stars above were real again. The air smelled of ash and ozone. He was back in the material world, lying amid the ruins of the chapel. Inquisitor Seraphim and Marshal Alaric stood over him, weapons drawn. What did you see? Seraphim demanded. He opened his eyes, faint light still flickering behind them. I saw the truth. And he looked up at the shattered statue of the Emperor. Even your god's fire casts shadows. They stared at him in silence, unsure whether to fear him or follow him. But far above them, in the warp, Xianj laughed, not in defeat, but in delight. Because every choice, even defiance, was still part of the game. The Human Torch had refused the call of chaos. But in doing so, he had drawn the attention of something far older and far more dangerous. The Emperor himself had felt the ripple. And for the first time in 10,000 years, something in the Golden Throne moved. What if the brightest fire in existence touched the oldest flame that ever lived? What if a man of burning will, mortal, defiant, free, stood before a god who had not spoken in 10,000 years? That's where this story now burns its way into the heart of darkness itself. After the warp event that shattered the chapel, Baal Primus descended into chaos. The Ecclesiarchy declared the flame seraph both saint and heretic. Armies began to march not against chaos, but against each other over him. And while the galaxy tore itself further apart, a message came. It wasn't written. It wasn't spoken. It arrived. A single, blinding beam of light split the sky, striking the fortress monastery like the finger of God. Every servo skull, every ship, every astropath in orbit screamed the same words across the void. The throne calls. Inquisitor Seraphim fell to her knees, trembling. Marshal Alaric bowed his head. Even the hardened Black Templars dared not meet Johnny's gaze. For the first time in recorded history, the Golden Throne of Terra had summoned a living soul. The journey was unlike anything Johnny had known. The perseverance of faith was escorted through the Imperium by an entire fleet of Imperial warships. Choirs of Psykers burned their lives away to shield the vessel from chaos storms. Across every world they passed, billions prayed, believing that some divine miracle was unfolding, that perhaps the Emperor himself was stirring. Johnny felt none of that reverence. Only dread. He had fought cosmic entities before, Galactus, Annihilus, even gods from beyond dimensions, but this felt different. This wasn't power. It was presence. Like standing at the edge of an eternal sun that had forgotten mercy. Seraphim stood beside him in silence. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper. No mortal has ever seen him and lived. Johnny didn't answer. His flames flickered weakly in the cold of space. When they arrived at Terra, he saw it the planet that was once Earth, now nothing more than a tomb of devotion and decay. Towering cathedrals scraped the stratosphere, built upon the bones of 10 billion dead. Rivers of pilgrims flowed endlessly toward the imperial palace, their chants echoing through eternity. The air itself seemed to hum with prayer. Johnny was escorted through golden gates taller than cities, across marble halls carved with the faces of saints and sinners alike. Everywhere, incense and blood filled the air. Servitors watched from the shadows. Skulls floated by, whispering hymns. And at the center of it all, the throne room. He entered. And there it was. The golden throne. A machine the size of a mountain, fused with the remnants of what had once been a man. Tubes and conduits pierced ancient flesh. Luminous energy poured from every surface. 10,000 Psykers screamed in the background, their souls consumed to feed its dying light. Johnny froze. His flame flickered like a candle before a storm. And then a sound. It wasn't speech, but it was heard in every atom of his being. You burn, brightly. Johnny staggered. The voice was everywhere inside him, around him, through him. I have watched your flame across the veil. You are not of this galaxy. Not of this time. Yet your fire reaches into the warp, and the warp recoils. Johnny fell to one knee, gasping. You're the Emperor. I was. Once. Now I am what remains. My light fades. And yet, your spark burns pure, untouched by faith, untouched by corruption. The throne's light flared, washing over him. Images flooded his mind, worlds dying, armies marching, chaos gods devouring stars. And beneath it all, the Emperor's eternal agony, his will chained to a corpse machine that would not let him die. You have defied the warp. You have rejected chaos. You are proof that light without faith can still be pure. Johnny stood shakily. Then why bring me here? If you're so powerful, why not fix this? For the first time, there was silence. Then, a whisper like a dying star. Because I cannot burn anymore. The words hit harder than any weapon. The Emperor, the god of mankind, was asking for his fire. Lend me your flame, Fireborn. Let me see again what it means to be alive. Johnny hesitated. You're asking me to set you free. No, I am asking you to remember me. To remind this galaxy that light does not demand worship. It demands will. He stepped closer. The throne trembled. The psychic field flared, threatening to tear reality apart. But Johnny raised his hand and touched the Emperor's dying light. The universe screamed. Flame met Godfire. The throne blazed white-hot. The entire imperial palace shook as ancient machinery awakened for the first time in millennia. Outside, across the galaxy, astropaths collapsed, crying out. He burns again. The Emperor burns again. And in that moment, Johnny saw it all, every soul in the Imperium, every spark of courage buried beneath fear. He felt them, billions upon billions of humans clinging to survival, their faith both beautiful and blind. He poured his fire into the throne, not to destroy, but to ignite. The Emperor's eyes opened. Just for a second. Twin suns blazing with divine sorrow and infinite understanding met Johnny's gaze. Go, the voice whispered. Your fire is not mine to keep. And with that, the light dimmed. The throne fell silent again. But in its wake, a new fire burned across the galaxy, not of worship, but of awakening. Across forgotten worlds, soldiers stood taller. Pilgrims whispered of the man of flame. Some said the Emperor smiled that day. Others said he wept. But all agreed on one thing. Humanity's fire had been rekindled. Johnny stood outside the palace gates, the sky of Terra glowing faintly gold for the first time in ages. Seraphine approached, her voice trembling. What happened in there? He looked at her, his flames burning steady and calm. He remembered what it felt like to live. And you? She asked. Johnny smiled faintly, gazing at the endless sprawl of the Imperium. Me? I remembered what it means to burn for something bigger than yourself. But deep beneath Terra, in the endless shadows beneath the throne, something else stirred. The flame had awakened not only light but memory. The Chaos Gods, watching from beyond the veil, trembled. For the first time in eons, the Emperor's will had reached into their realm, and scarred it. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Man of Flame had changed everything. What happens when a god whispers life into a dying empire? What happens when the people, long chained by faith and fear, begin to believe not in divinity, but in themselves? That is how revolutions begin, not with armies, not with weapons, but with a single spark that refuses to go out. And this spark was Johnny Storm. In the days following the reignition of the throne, the galaxy trembled. Astropaths across the Imperium reported visions of fire spreading across the void, not the consuming kind, but the illuminating one. Planets on the brink of despair found courage again. The weak began to rise. But to the High Lords of Terra, courage was the most dangerous heresy of all. The flame seraph has corrupted the faithful, cried Cardinal Vrax during the conclave. His light is not of the Emperor, but of pride. Of rebellion. The Inquisition divided. Half called for Johnny's sainthood, half demanded his execution. The Adeptus Mechanicus wanted to study him. The Black Templars wanted to follow him. The Ecclesiarchy wanted to burn him. And amidst all that madness, Johnny did something no one expected. He vanished. Months passed. Reports emerged from distant sectors, a flaming figure appearing during battles, saving colonies from chaos incursions, stopping planetary purges. No ship could track him. No scanner could lock onto him. He had become legend. Children drew his mark, a single flame inside a circle on walls and armor. Soldiers whispered his name before charging into battle. Even some space marines began painting small fire sigils on their pauldrons, defying the Ecclesiarchy's wrath. Everywhere the Imperium tried to snuff him out, his influence grew stronger. For the first time in 10,000 years, humanity began to question whether the Emperor truly demanded their chains or if he had meant for them to burn free. Inquisitor Seraphine was one of the few who still sought him not as a hunter, but as a believer. Her fleet scoured the Segmentum Solar for months until finally, she found him on the dead world of Caliban's Reach. The planet was ash, a battlefield long forgotten. There, amid the ruins of old cathedrals, Johnny sat cross-legged, a quiet flame hovering above his palm. "You shouldn't have come," he said without looking up. Seraphine removed her hood. "You set the galaxy on fire. The Lords of Terra are losing control. Entire sectors have rebelled in your name." "I didn't ask them to," he murmured. "You inspired them to," she replied sharply. "You touched the throne itself. They saw you walk out of the palace alive. They believe the Emperor spoke through you." Johnny looked at her, eyes reflecting the dying sky. "He didn't speak through me. He listened to me. There's a difference." Seraphine knelt. "You can't stop this, Johnny. They will come for you. The Inquisition, the Custodes, maybe even the Primarches if word reaches them." He smiled faintly. "Let them come. Fire doesn't hide. It spreads. That night, the stars above Caliban's reach flared, an entire fleet dropping from warp. Dozens of Imperial battleships surrounded the planet, broadcasting a single message. By order of the Inquisition, the heretic known as the Flame Seraph is to be purged. Seraphine gripped her weapon. They'll destroy this world to silence you. Johnny rose, his body igniting with golden light. Then I'll make sure it's a story worth telling. He soared into the sky, the air trembling with power. When the first Exterminatus warhead fell, he caught it midair and burned it into plasma dust. The entire fleet opened fire, but the shots never reached the surface. Every beam, every missile, every fragment of hate turned to light before it could touch him. From orbit, it looked as if the planet itself had become a sun. Then, one by one, the ships stopped firing. The gunners lowered their hands. The captains knelt. Even the inquisitorial flagship went silent as a voice filled their minds, Johnny's voice, carried through the warp itself. You've fought long enough in the name of fear. Fight now for the light you've forgotten. And just like that, the rebellion had a face not of vengeance, but of defiance. In the following months, the Imperium fractured. Planets declared independence, calling themselves the free worlds of flame. Priests were overthrown, temples burned not in hatred, but in renewal. Everywhere, people whispered a dangerous phrase. The Emperor burns within us all. The ecclesiarchy called it blasphemy. The people called it truth. And in the shadows of Terra, the custodes debated. Some claimed that if the Emperor had truly reawakened even for a moment, then perhaps his will was changing. But one thing was certain, the galaxy was no longer afraid of its own fire. Meanwhile, far beyond the light of the Imperium, in the eye of terror, the Chaos Gods stirred uneasily. The warp itself had grown unstable since Johnny's touch on the throne. For the first time in eons, the whispers of fear were met with something else: laughter, courage, hope. Kern's rage dimmed. Nurgle's rot withered. Slaanesh screamed in frustration. And Tseanch watched in fascination. A mortal flame that corrupts corruption itself, he mused. How delightful. Because even chaos understood a new power had entered the game. Not faith. Not sorcery. Not divinity. Will. The will to burn, not to destroy, but to become. And so the legend spread, the Fire Seraph lives. The man who defied gods, who reignited the Emperor, who showed the galaxy that light and freedom are the same thing. But deep down, Johnny knew this wasn't victory. It was only the beginning. Because for every soul he inspired, there were 10 more who still bowed in fear. And for every world that burned bright, the darkness watched, and waited. The galaxy had remembered how to burn. What happens when the light grows so bright that even the darkness begins to see itself? When fire touches shadow long enough, it doesn't just destroy it, it changes it. That was the secret Johnny Storm never meant to uncover. His light didn't simply banish the darkness of the warp, it provoked it. It began as whispers. Not from the faithful, but from the void itself. The Chaos Gods, eternal tyrants of human emotion, could no longer ignore him. For millennia, they had fed on despair, hatred, and corruption. Now, something new was spreading through the warp, a current of burning clarity that seared their very essence. Kern roared in fury. This false flame weakens the rage of battle. Nurgle's laughter withered into coughing silence. Slaanesh's pleasure soured into pain. And Tseanch smiled. He burns not with faith, nor with chaos. He burns with purpose. Let us see how long mortal purpose can survive eternity. Across the galaxy, the free worlds of flame began to feel the change. The warp storms that once separated systems were thinning. Demonic incursions grew erratic, unstable, confused. Some daemons even disintegrated mid-battle, unable to exist near the spreading light. But as the light spread, so too did its shadow. Reports came in of false prophets, men who claimed to channel Johnny's fire, using it to seize power. Planets once united under hope turned on each other, each claiming to interpret the flame's will differently. It was the oldest irony of all, the light that freed them was now blinding them. Johnny knew it. He had seen it before back home, in his own world. Every time humanity tasted power, it devoured itself. He sat in silence aboard an abandoned Mechanicus cruiser, staring into the warp. Its surface rippled like liquid fire, showing reflections that weren't his own. He saw himself older, darker, wreathed not in flame but in corruption. A voice whispered from the reflection. "You've become what you fought against. You're worshipped now, Johnny. And worship is just another kind of cage." He clenched his fists. "Get out of my head." But the voice only laughed soft, knowing. "Do you think you can burn forever without becoming what the galaxy needs you to be? Even light has to choose, will it warm the world, or will it blind it?" It was then he realized it wasn't a daemon speaking. It was his own flame. Elsewhere, in the Eye of Terror, the Chaos Gods gathered their will. Khurn forged a new legion, not of flesh, but of molten armor and burning rage, the Crimson Pyre. Slaanesh infused them with endless hunger, Nurgle made them immortal through decay, and Tzientch wove them together with his schemes. Their purpose was singular, to consume the fire seraph and make him theirs. And at their head, they placed a champion, a former Grey Knight who had once faced Johnny in battle. Twisted now, bound by hatred and shame. His name was Ardent Vale. Once a saint. Now, the Ash Knight. When the Crimson Pyre emerged from the warp, entire sectors burned. But this time, it wasn't the Imperium that screamed. It was the stars themselves, the warp bleeding into reality as physics and faith shattered under the assault. Johnny returned to the battlefield once more. He didn't lead armies this time. He came alone. Above the dead world of Vandros 9, the fleets of light and shadow clashed, thousands of ships, each firing in silence, because sound could no longer exist in the burning void. And in the center of that cosmic storm floated Johnny Storm, surrounded by golden fire. The Ash Knight appeared opposite him, a being of black glass and molten metal, his armor leaking ash like blood. "You think you've freed them," the knight said, his voice like cracking stone. "You've only given them another god to fear." "I'm not their god," Johnny replied quietly. "I'm their reminder that they don't need one." "Then burn with me," the knight roared. "And let's see whose fire lasts longer." They collided. It wasn't a duel, it was an extinction-level event. The energy from their clash tore moons apart. Every strike was a nova, every movement a storm. Fire met shadow, and for the first time in eons, the warp bled light. On the worlds below, mortals looked up and saw two suns, one gold, one black, locked in battle. And in that sight, they remembered why they had believed in the first place. Not in the Emperor, not in the flame seraph, but in the power of choice. For 3 days and nights, the duel raged. When the flames finally died, only one figure remained. The Ash Knight lay broken, his armor shattered, his essence leaking into the void. But his voice still echoed. "You can't win, Johnny. Light doesn't last here." Johnny's fire dimmed to a soft glow. "Then I'll just have to keep relighting it." And with that, he reached down and instead of destroying the fallen knight, he burned away the corruption, leaving only a man behind. The first Chaos Warrior to ever be redeemed. That act sent shockwaves through creation. Even the Chaos Gods faltered, feeling something they had never felt before, doubt. For if redemption was possible, then their dominion was not eternal. And that terrified them more than any weapon ever could. From that day on, Johnny's fire changed. It no longer just consumed. It purified. It transformed. He was no longer the flame seraph. He had become something far older, something the galaxy had forgotten. A living flame. Neither God nor man. Neither chaos nor order. Just will, made light. And that, more than anything else, was what the Warhammer galaxy feared most, a being that could not be controlled, worshipped, or destroyed. In the warp, the fire spread, reshaping it not to banish chaos, but to remind it what it once was: passion, emotion, creation. For the first time in history, the Imperium flickered as if it remembered that even chaos had once been born from light. And deep within the golden throne on Terra, a faint ember stirred again. Perhaps the Emperor was smiling. What happens when light wakes something that was never meant to sleep? And when that something opens its eyes, does the galaxy tremble because it sees salvation, or because it realizes it has none? The fire Johnny Storm had kindled across the Imperium was no longer a rumor, no longer rebellion. It was reality. Millions had risen from despair. Warp storms receded. Whole sectors once cursed by darkness now shimmered beneath a pale, golden glow. But on Terra, at the heart of the Imperium, the impossible occurred. For the first time in 10,000 years, the golden throne flickered. Inside the sanctum of the Imperial Palace, the Adeptus Custodes fell to one knee as alarms blared through the holy halls. A light, faint but undeniable, was pulsing from the throne, not the mechanical sputter of decaying machinery, but a heartbeat. And then, a voice. Who dares light my shadow? Every astropath across the Sol system screamed in unison. Every inquisitor dropped to their knees. Every space marine felt the same cold fire burn within their gene seed. The Emperor of mankind, the God who had been silent for millennia, had spoken. On a distant world, Johnny felt it like a spear through his soul. The fire within him faltered for a moment. His body trembled. He had seen death, gods, daemons, and despair, but this was something older. Something vast. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest as the psychic weight of the Emperor's will crushed the air around him. And then, amid that unbearable light, came the whisper. Flame-bearer, you have disturbed my dream. Johnny gasped. If you can still dream, you can still wake. I dream so that humanity can endure, the Emperor's voice thundered. I sleep so that the light you carry may survive the dark I bound within myself. And now, you would undo that balance. Johnny stood slowly, his flames flickering defiant against the golden pressure. Balance. You call this balance? Billions dying every day in your name, worshipping a corpse on a throne. They live, the Emperor said coldly. Because they believe. Without that belief, they will tear each other apart. Johnny's voice rose like a burning tide. Then maybe they should. Maybe it's time they stop crawling and start walking again. The psychic storm erupted, shaking the void. On Terra, mountains cracked. On Mars, the forged shrines flickered out. Across the galaxy, Psykers bled from their eyes and screamed as two titanic wills collided across eternity. But then silence. The warp froze. Time stilled. Johnny opened his eyes and found himself standing not in the galaxy, but in a place beyond it, a realm of thought and memory. The Emperor stood before him, radiant and terrible, his form shifting between man and god, warrior and light. They were face to face, the immortal and the man who had accidentally become myth. "You misunderstand the cost of freedom," said the Emperor, his voice echoing through infinity. "I built this Imperium not to rule, but to protect. And yet they worshipped me. I became the prison I sought to escape." Johnny's flames flickered low. "Then why not end it?" "Because ending it would mean ending them. Humanity is not ready." Johnny stared at him. "They never will be if you keep treating them like children." The Emperor's expression hardened. "And what are you, then? A teacher? A savior?" Johnny shook his head. "No. I'm a reminder." The Emperor studied him in silence. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. "You think light can save them?" "No," Johnny replied quietly. "But it can show them how to save themselves." For a moment, just a moment, the Emperor smiled. And in that single expression, the entire Imperium trembled. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "it is time I stop dreaming." A blinding radiance erupted. The golden throne shattered. The Astronomicon flared like a second sun. Across the galaxy, billions felt the pulse of awakening, a warmth unlike any they had ever known. The Emperor of mankind had risen. But the moment of hope was short-lived. From the depths of the warp came a roar that split the heavens. The Chaos Gods, enraged and terrified, unleashed everything. The Eye of Terror expanded, consuming stars. Whole systems were swallowed in screaming flame. The veil between reality and madness was gone. The final war had begun. The Emperor descended from the ruins of his throne, golden wings unfurling like solar flares. Johnny stood beside him, the living flame beside the golden light. And together, they faced the tide of oblivion. Every daemon, every forgotten god, every echo of hatred and despair that the galaxy had ever known poured forth. The sky became blood. The stars turned black. But where the warp's darkness spread, fire answered, golden and red, divine and human, side by side. The Emperor fought with the weight of 10,000 years of suffering. Johnny fought with the heart of a man who refused to quit. Every strike from the Emperor burned galaxies. Every wave from Johnny reignited stars. And amid that cataclysmic chaos, simple, fragile mortals looked up and saw them fighting together. Not as gods. Not as saviors. But as lights that refused to die. The battle lasted beyond time. Empires fell, daemons perished, and the warp itself began to collapse in on itself, unable to sustain its own corruption against the unity of two wills. But power has a price. Johnny's flames began to fade. His body, human as ever, couldn't hold the inferno much longer. The Emperor looked at him not with command, but with sorrow. "You cannot survive this," he said. Johnny smiled weakly. "I know. But maybe that's the point." The Emperor frowned. "Explain." Johnny's voice was faint but steady. "Light doesn't belong to one man. It never did. It belongs to everyone. Let it go, and they'll carry it on." And before the Emperor could reply, Johnny stepped forward into the heart of the warp storm and let go. His flames exploded outward, burning not to destroy, but to heal. For the first time in existence, the warp felt peace. And then, there was silence. When the light faded, the warp was gone. The Eye of Terror had closed. The Chaos Gods were no more. The Emperor stood alone at the edge of a silent universe. And for the first time in his immortal existence, he felt warmth. Not from his power, but from the memory of a mortal who refused to bow. On the worlds of man, dawn broke for the first time in 100 centuries. The stars shone brighter. Warp storms ceased. Humanity looked to the heavens, and instead of fear, they saw hope. No statues were built. No temples rose. Just a whisper carried across worlds. Flame on. The emperor walked among his people, nameless, unrecognized, his golden light dimmed to mortal glow. And when someone asked, who ended the long night, he smiled and said, a man who remembered that light doesn't ask permission to shine. What happens to a galaxy that finally wins its war? When there are no enemies left to fight, no gods to fear, no saviors to follow. Does it rest? Or does it forget why it fought at all? 1,000 years have passed since the final war of light and silence, since the warp collapsed, since the gods screamed their last. The galaxy is quiet now. The void is still. Planets once torn apart by endless battle bloom again. The Imperium, or what remains of it, is no longer an empire. It is a union of free worlds, scattered but united by memory, not rule. They call this new age the era of Ember. And it began, with the death of a man who burned brighter than stars. On Terra, the ruins of the Golden Throne are a sanctuary of peace. Where once the endless chants of priests filled the air, now there is silence broken only by the wind that carries the faint scent of ash and oil. Children play among the fallen statues of saints. They do not bow before them. They climb them, laugh upon them, turn them into stories. The custodes, the once golden guardians of a corpse god, now walk as teachers among the people. Their armor is no longer polished gold, it's worn, simple, symbolic. And in the heart of what was once the throne room, there burns a single flame. It has burned for 1,000 years. Never brighter, never dimmer. Just, eternal. They call it the living ember. No one tends to it. No one guards it. And yet, it never goes out. Some say it's a fragment of the Emperor's light. Others whisper it's the last echo of Johnny Storm, the man who dared to bring fire to a world that worshipped the dark. But those who stand before it for too long, those who stare into its calm, endless glow, swear they hear a voice. A human voice. Keep it burning. Not for me. For each other. Across the stars, new civilizations have risen. On Mars, the Mechanics have turned their forges to creation instead of conquest, building ships not for war, but for exploration. Their new creed is simple. To create is to pray. On Catachan, the jungles have reclaimed their dominion. The warriors who once fought Daemons now live as protectors of life, fierce, loyal, but free. Kadaya has been rebuilt not as a fortress, but as a sanctuary. A world of scholars and wanderers who study what it means to be human after gods. Even the Ildari, once fractured and fading, have begun to emerge from their hidden worlds, drawn to the silence of the warp, finally able to dream without fear. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, the Tyranids drift dormant, sleeping. Some say Johnny's final fire reached even them, burning hunger into hibernation. The galaxy, for the first time in all its history, is alive and at peace. Yet peace brings its own questions. Without the Emperor's worship, what becomes of faith? Without chaos, what becomes of choice? And without the fire of conflict, what drives the soul? That is the burden of the era of Ember, to find purpose in peace. The poets say humanity now burns differently. Not as a wildfire that devours, but as a hearth that warms. One such poet, an old man on a quiet colony world, sits by his window and writes. He has no name worth remembering, but his eyes shimmer faintly, reflecting light that does not fade. He writes, "Once, there was a man who fell from the sky, made of fire. He fought monsters, gods, and kings, and in the end, burned himself away. But his fire did not die. It passed to us, to the lost, to the dreamers, to the small hands that build from the ashes. That is what it means to be human. Not to conquer. Not to serve. But to shine, even when no one is watching." He closes the book and looks to the stars. One of them glows a little brighter than the rest, just a flicker, but enough to remind him that stories never end. And far, far beyond even that, in a place where reality folds into itself, where the last remnants of the warp drift like dying embers, there is light. It moves like thought, speaks like warmth, remembers like love. It doesn't call itself Johnny Storm anymore. It is fire, and it is freedom. And sometimes, when a child lights a candle, or a star ignites on the edge of creation, a whisper rides the flame, unseen, unfelt, but always there. Flame on.